Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag and drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way. I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to The Next Reel. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Cries and Whispers is over. It's early Monday morning, and I am in pain.
Would you mind listening to me for a little while? Only a moment. I just want to tell you that I have made a film for you. Perhaps just for you. I wrote a screenplay about 4 women who met for a few days in dramatic circumstances. I asked 4 magnificent, wonderful actresses who are my friends to play the 4 parts. Harriet Andersson, Ingrid Thulin, Kari Sylvan, and Liv Ullmann. I asked my friend Sven Nykvist to do the camera work as usual. I asked the rest of my colleagues to come once more to my aid. We found an old manor house in a silent park. For 40 days, we were making a film which we liked. It is called Whispers and Cries. If you ask me whether it is a good or a bad film, I don't know. All I know is that it is a film dear to my heart. That is why I asked you to see it. I want you to like it.
Andy Nelson, welcome to the next reel. It's good to have you here.
Nice to be here. Thanks for the invite.
If others wanted to join us on the next reel and see what's going on in our social universe, and I only ask because of the two of us, one of us has gone crazy with social media, where would they go?
The best place, I'm glad you asked, Pete. The best place for people to go is to check out our Instagram page, which is Instagram. We are the next reel over at Instagram. You can check out, we're doing a lot of posts over there, a lot of posts about the movie we're talking about each week, and a lot of other posts that are, from other hosts doing picks of the week for movies to watch. And we're talking about what's going on over in our Discord chat room, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of stuff over there.
There's so much stuff.
There's lots. So Instagram's a great place. If you want to get in on the conversation, head to Discord. So what people need to do is just head over to thenextreel.com. They can find all of our socials because we're also on Facebook and Twitter. They can check us out there, and Pinterest, where we post all of the movie posters of the movies we're talking about, and jump into our Discord chat room where they can get in on the conversation with all of our other wonderful listeners.
All right, Andy, here we are. We're talking about our Best Picture nominees that are also foreign language films.
Yes, we are.
We're deep in it now.
We're in the Swedish period. The 70s is also known as the Swedish years.
The Swedish years, because effectively, while the last movie that we talked about was Z, great.
Correct, 1969.
We have a skip, and the skip is because we did the movie already, and that was The Immigrants.
Correct. We covered The Immigrants in one of our listeners' choice episodes, and that was it was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film in 1972, the 1971 Academy Awards, and in 1972 it was nominated for Best Picture, which is interesting because its sequel, The New Land, was nominated that same year for Best Foreign Language Film. Anyway,
so they really had their house in order, is what we're saying. Everything was really tight.
Exactly. Yeah. So the Swedes really got in the early 70s in the Oscars because now we're talking about 1973 when Ingmar Bergman's film Cries and Whispers was nominated for Best Picture.
Cries and Whispers, Andy. IMDb says that this is a story of a woman dying of cancer in early 20th century Sweden, and she's visited by her two sisters. And as a result, long repressed feelings between the siblings rise to the surface. Nailed it, IMDb. Nailed it. And with that, I think we're done. So join us next week. I tried to leave our conversation last week when we were talking about coming attractions. I tried to leave with a sense of optimism, and you countered my sense of optimism with a question. When I said I'm looking forward to this, you asked, "Are you?" And and I realize now that I wasn't. This was a tough watch.
Ingmar Bergman makes films that I think are for a particular audience. I struggle personally with Ingmar Bergman films. I generally find his films very interesting, very artfully put together, but often very there is a barrier between his films and me. I feel like he is making his film. I feel like he's making his films very specifically for an audience that likes to kind of really just dig into every little shot and every little nook and cranny and really just go to town analyzing it. Like it feels, and I don't know if this is fair to say, but it feels like when you say Ingmar Bergman, I think that his films to a certain extent fit the profile of what so often is spoofed as being a foreign film when you look at kind of Americans saying it's a foreign film, just like long shots of somebody in emotional anguish cutting to, for just strange objects or whatever, it feels very much like an art film. And I think there is an incredible amount of art in Ingmar Bergman's films. It's hard for me to find a connection to any of them that I have seen. And I've seen, I don't know, maybe half dozen of them now.
I think this one was a tough one, and I am perplexed by this movie because I find of the Bergman films that I have seen, and I am far from a Bergman scholar, and I'm not a completionist by any stretch. I find this movie is a simple movie of Bergman's, and so I find it perplexing that it was so popular at the time. And we'll talk about the extent of its popularity later. But the simplicity of it, what is on the screen is what is on the screen, right? There is little for me, I feel like, to dig into in terms of the symbolism of these relationships. This is a relationships, just a catalog of relationships of great pain. It is a story of death and dying and how people, because of their respective relationships, deal with death and dying and grief and literal pain and suffering. And it all takes place in a red room, in a red house with red fabric and red everywhere. So, like for me, it is naked in its simplicity, and so there is not much there's not much else to talk about. So, let us say for table stakes that this movie is not made for me, as it is not made for you, and we'll put that aside, and I'm going to approach the movie as if it was actually made for me. And we'll see how it goes.
I feel like maybe Eiffel 65 missed a chance to really liven things up with this film. Instead of blue Daba D, they should have done red Daba D. And it could have been all about
Daba Dead.
Daba Dead. It could have been all about this particular film.
Yeah. Well, because it's interesting. I think, this is weird, far from the first to say this, but Bergman uses his filmmaking as a form of therapy. It's cinema therapy, right? I mean, this is a guy who's a lifelong agnostic, and he's exploring the constraints of faith through pain on screen. There was a period where he claimed that, in answering an interviewer's question, that yes, all of the women in the film, they're a composite of my mother. And then later he says, oh yes, I was lying. I just needed something to say. It's not my mother. The guy is clearly working through something.
But and that's what I think is so interesting about Bergman, because not only does he say that yeah, I was lying, I just needed to say something, but it clearly became something that was a big sign of pain for him at that point in his life, because then he's just like, I have lived with the anguish of the fact that I said that for years now. And it's like, wow, he really takes things to a deep emotional core when he's kind of dealing with his own emotions about things.
Truly. This is a guy who feels deeply. That is absolutely true. I want to go back to that to finish that quote, because I realized I put the whole thing in here for a reason. That was a lie for the media. It was a spontaneous and careless remark. It was to haunt me. Since then, it has always been linked to the film. Some stupid remarks one makes tend to live a life of their own. It was a lie. I said it in order to have something to say. It's very hard. This is the important part. It's very hard to say anything about Cries and Whispers, Bergman said in the documentary Bergman and the Cinema. It is very hard to say anything about Cries and Whispers, Andy. And I guess that's where I feel like we should start our conversation about Cries and Whispers.
Well, yeah, right. And I think that you said a couple things that were pretty interesting. And one is that it's fairly simple as far as what the story is. There's not a lot. You have these sisters in this house, 3 sisters. One of them is dying, and then there's the maid who's been there for years. And then the sister dies, and then they just kind of deal with their emotional turmoil. And then they fire the maid and leave. And that's basically the story when you look at kind of what the context of the story is. But within that, we've got strange flashbacks and memories of like horribly just repressive acts being done by people in the film. Like Maria, her husband is apparently so distraught that I'm assuming, and this is I think the thing with Bergman is you have to read a lot of stuff into this. Like you talked about, even just IMDb saying when a woman dying of cancer, it's never said what she's dying of in the film. The film never specifically says. It's just she's dying of something. The doctor comes, seems to kind of examine her,
although
kind
interestingly,
of stomach area.
In the write-ups, everybody seems to have interpreted it that it's uterine cancer, not even just cancer.
Right.
Uterine cancer. Where in the film do we get that?
Exactly. And I'm assuming it's those few moments when the doctor comes, he kind of puts his hand on her belly just to kind of examine something. And that's it. And I'm like, okay, so that, I guess everyone interprets as uterine cancer.
And it does make me wonder if it's lost in translation, though. I mean, there is reasonable doubt here. Like, and I wonder if our Swedish listeners can tell us, is this just, lost in the subtitles?
Like, do they actually say it in Swedish somewhere?
Yeah.
That's a good point. It's entirely possible. We're basing it off of whatever. I watched the Criterion version of this, and usually they're pretty good with things like that. I would think that if they're talking about uterine cancer, that would actually come through in the subtitles. Right. But you never know. Regardless, it's like those sorts of things aren't specifically said. When we have Maria dealing with this memory of, she's with this doctor that she apparently, I think, had an affair with, although he never really seems to like her, so it's kind of odd. But apparently Maria's husband is, I'm assuming, in so much anguish over the fact of all of this, that he goes into the other room and stabs himself. And apparently it's not fatal. We never really find out, but he's alive later, so I'm guessing he's fine. And then we have Karen, the other sister, who is living a life of such despair with her husband, who's a jerk, and she seems to be I don't know what happened to her. We never really get kind of the flashback to her youth, like what happened to her as a kid, that she hates it when people touch her, but she apparently either hates the idea that her husband never touches her or doesn't ever want him to touch her, that she takes a piece of glass to her own vagina and mutilates herself as a way to say, nope, you're not getting this. It's like, what? It's like some horrifying flashbacks of these things. And it's like, I struggle trying to figure out what is, and this is the interesting thing, because it's a fairly simple story, but there's a lot of more kind of complex emotional things that clearly Bergman is exploring with these sorts of elements in the story that makes for, I guess, the film critics and analysts to just go crazy, coming up with theories as to what all of this is happening.
Yeah, and they go crazy. I mean, film theorists are all over the place in trying to determine what these things mean and the psychological background of sort of what each of these sisters is doing and how it relates to their relationship with one another. And I think there's something to that. But I do want to just lob in the Anna, the nursemaid, who is the only one to get out of here as, I mean, she's sort of she's the more spiritual one. She's the one of faith. She is the only one of the family story that truly appears to love Agnes, who is dying. And in the end, she is the one who is ultimately crapped all over, right? They don't
right.
They don't end up giving her what she ultimately needs. She says, "I don't want anything," but at the end, the only joy that she gets is that she ended up, stealing Agnes's diary and reading stories of Agnes's once joy has given her something, I think, of her own joy in the end, which is something, I guess, but taking the faithful person and demonstrating everyone else sort of having taken advantage of her and leaving her with nothing, I think is a statement that is a kind of it's a statement that is none too clear in the hands of Bergman's filmmaking here about how he's struggling with his own relationship to faith and what it means.
Well, and yeah, I mean, the relationship with faith, I mean, that's a really interesting element, because after Agnes dies, the priest comes to deliver his message over her bedside before dealing with the funeral and everything. And as he finishes that up, he says to the sisters, her level of faith was so much greater than my own, or something like that. And it's like, wow, okay, what are you saying about yourself there, Father?
Padre.
Right. It's interesting that that's kind of how that is viewed. And so I just don't know. And I guess it's just the nature of Bergman is that he layers in enough elements of the story to kind of have to force you to guess as to all of these other things that are going on with it. And I guess the joy is, how deep do you want to dig in these stories when it's a story of such pain and anguish and such just emotional, kind of raw, kind of struggle. And that seems to be, for me, what I generally find in Bergman's films is there's this it's a big emotional struggle. And we get that in this film as they're dealing with the death of Agnes and kind of what it means to have to deal with somebody who's going through the act of death, which is very difficult for anyone who's done it. And then after she's died, which is about halfway through the film, dealing with their own relationships and watching the relationship of Maria and Karen as they kind of try to figure out, do they have much of a relationship? What does that mean? And then kind of seeing that all kind of, I guess, fall apart again by the end. It's very Bergman. And I mean, we've only covered one other Bergman film on the show, which was Autumn Sonata in our Ingrid Bergman series. And that also, I just felt it was such an interesting pair to have discussed on the show, because that also has kind of that third act, middle of the night, emotional, like raw conversation that they have before leading to the end of the film.
It absolutely is. I think all of the things that you just described are symbolically connected to the color red, and I do want to talk a little bit about the color red and the production design, because I think it is connected to Bergman and his constant choices. It is also a divergence for him in this film. He says, when talking about the color red, I think of this as the inside of the human soul as a membranous red. All of my films can be thought of in terms of black and white, except Cries and Whispers. And this is a note on how all of the women are clad in white until the death, right? As you say, and then it's all black, right? They're all in black after the death of Agnes. He is using this red as a symbol, right, of rage and grief and sadness and denial, and particularly the sisterly relationship and that weird turnabout between Maria and Karen, how they struggle to come to grips with one another, and then absolutely come to grips with one another over the course of about 10 minutes, I think is a really interesting turn. And they all do it in just drenched in this just blood red of the film.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think that it's such an interesting color, because there's also kind of the passion that Maria has when she's with the doctor. Like kind of the red flashes of her to her memories of her time with the doctor, but also red flashing back to the memories of her husband stabbing himself. You have the red flashbacks of Anna, the maid, as she is remembering her own daughter who died. And that's never really explored. Like, did she have a husband? I don't really know. He's obviously not in the picture now, so she's just got this infant that's dead. And so kind of the red of that life. And then Karen, when she kind of stabs herself in her crotch and smears the blood on her face, and it's just kind of like the red of being a woman, kind of the menstrual red, and how she's almost like kind of taking that out and just like denying that in some way. And it's just like denying womanhood. The red can be interpreted in so many different ways. And I don't think we've talked about this much red since, Raise the Red Lantern and Judo, when we're talking about Zhang Yimou and the way he uses colors. And I think there's a lot of intensity to the red here, and just like being buried just like in this just field of red for the duration of film. I find it to be so enveloping, and it does make you feel like you're almost like inside a womb with these women for the duration of the film.
Well, I find the thing that I struggle with is that there is so much red, and red used in so many different ways in the film, right? It's a color that is carrying so much symbolic weight for Bergman that I find myself exhausted by it, right? It becomes an unsubtle knife, and I think that is to the film's detriment. Right, that he has so overwhelmed every frame with this color, and he has asked it to do so much in every relationship, in every sort of vile twist of humanity, whether the attempted suicide or the genital manipulation or the death of Agnes. Ultimately, like, red plays such a heavy player in this. In every relationship, that it ultimately becomes neutered, right? It ends up losing weight for me, and becomes kind of wasted by the end. I'm exhausted by it more than I'm sort of in tune with it.
Well, and I think that's okay. I think a few things to say there. That's interesting because, one, I think anyone who is an essayist or a critic or an analyst who loves digging into this stuff would disagree with you, because it gives them so much rich fodder to write about and to think about in context of all the stuff Bergman is potentially saying here. But at the same time, like, I'm kind of with you. It's like there's so many ways to read all of this, and Bergman isn't giving a lot of information as to how he's wanting it to be interpreted. So I guess I end up seeing it. I don't get overwhelmed by it and kind of tire of it. I actually think it's just beautiful. Like, the film is just stunning to look at. It's just the way that it's composed, the way that Sven Nykvist worked the film stock at the time, which was very difficult to capture red. I mean, even into the 90s, red has been a very difficult color to capture well because of the way that it can overwhelm what the film is reading. And so just as a side note, he really had to go through and plan out not just the walls, but the white colors, like the tone of white that the women would be wearing, the makeup that they would have on their face, and how the makeup would kind of work with their skin to kind of pair with the red, the color of their hair, like everything had to be kind of toned just right in order for the red to not just kind of bleed in an explosive sort of way. Really interesting.
And to your point, I am much more interested in Sven Nykvist's work here and Borgelund on the makeup, because that is like, this is so much more of a production design challenge and a cinematographic challenge that it was overcome here by choosing to just drench every frame in a paralyzing amount of red. I find that part fascinating.
I love it. I mean, yeah, and Marek Voslund, production design, like all of that, the way that it comes together in this world, I just am just astounded. It's just beautiful to watch. And the way that Bergman composes the shots with Nykvist, I mean, everything works exceptionally for me. But yeah, I think largely, I guess, circling back around to my point, I do find by the time I get through all of the thinking about all of that is like, it's like, there's just so many ways to interpret this, but that it becomes tiring because it's unending, the different interpretations that you can read. And you can just go through even just the short number of comments that Wikipedia talks about the varying ways that people interpret the stuff within the film. And you can see right there that, there's a lot of psychoanalytics about what the color red means, what's this saying, what's that saying. And I think to a certain extent, it's like, is it saying that much? Or are we going back to what Bergman said, that it's very hard to say anything about Cries and Whispers?
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I of course, the analysts and theorists and the people who just love kind of diving into and perhaps I would say creating puzzles that don't exist, or it's fun. And yeah. I certainly, there are properties that I find I have a great time like digging into these things. I mean, give me 3 hours with Death of a Salesman, right? I just that's a property I adore and it speaks to me. This is one that really doesn't. And I find what's on screen, to me, is what's on screen. I don't find Bergman's use of red to be particularly instructive of interpretation because there's so much of it. I think the filmmakers who do a better job of demonstrating story and intention with color are those who are able to use it in a way that leads me through the story and through interpretation. By blanketing us with one color, it tells one story, and I don't think it does it in a way that is insightful in this film. I think it's a blunt instrument.
It's interesting that there aren't that many films that I can think of that use color so explosively, where it's just so intense. Speaking to the color red, I mean, obviously I mentioned a couple Zhang Yimou films, but most recently Guillermo del Toro did that horror, that gothic horror film of his that also had a lot of red, although there was a much more intentional reason why. However, it's interesting that it's very bold. And when you're going to use that much, I mean, you're making a very bold statement with the look of the project. And I guess that's what I find interesting about this film is even if I am less interested in kind of the ways it can be read, I do really appreciate the fact that he made something that is so bold and unique looking, because you just don't see. I mean, I have never walked into a room that is fully red. It's like not many people do that as their decorating options. It's a pretty big way to kind of make statements. And I guess it was a castle, the Taxinga Nasby Castle in Sweden, which was under renovation at the time. And so they had liberties to paint however they wanted to. And so, of course, they fully took that option up with putting this particular film together.
Well, I was looking at some other films that I like and am able to really sort of associate with color, and even films that some films I love, some films I don't love, some films we talked about, right? I mean, The Red Shoes is one of those movies that I think is worth dropping in here as a film that has a more intentional use, an insightful use of color. Vertigo is another movie. I mean, you want to talk about the way color is woven into the story. I think is incredible. The Last Emperor we haven't talked about, but that's another one that's just dramatic, incredible use of color to drive narrative. It's not that it's not possible to do it. It's that Bergman uses it like a brick, and I find it sort of emotionally exhausting. It's a movie that's only an hour and a half long, and it feels like it took most of the day out of my life.
Well, and I think, leaving the color aside, I think that's Bergman, right? I mean, this is a heavy, heavy film. It feels like a play because it really is. And it was made into a play, which we'll bring up at some point. But the whole idea of just these three sisters and the maid, for the duration pretty much. And it's just conversation. It feels very much like an emotional hour and a half roller coaster is what we're in for with this one. And that's,
I was curious because
says this is Bergman.
On Bergman's website, right, the website in his name, this title is subtitled "A Chamber Play in Red About a Dying Woman and Her Sisters." It's a telling and obvious subtitle. I don't know if that was the official subtitle or if that was something that sort of came later, but it strikes me as appropriate and maybe a better way to sell the film for those who haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it feels very much just like the sort of heavy play that you would go watch. It has that feel. And, it's interesting because he got the title itself from a piece of music, from a critic who said something about a piece of music, happened to be Mozart. And he said that his music sounds like Cries and Whispers.
Yeah.
And
have you listened to the track? It's Mozart's Piano Concerto number 14 in E flat major.
I have not. Or maybe I've heard it. I just didn't listen to it before we started recording.
It doesn't sound anything like Cries and Whispers to me. I mean, it's a Mozart piano concerto, and so there's this sort of give and take between the piano and the rest of the small ensemble. But it's a bizarre way to interpret music that is energetic, and it is a minor it's in minor, so it has this sort of melancholiness to it, but it is an energetic melancholy. It doesn't sound like something that just feels quite... I found it a strange way to interpret. Again, I wonder what is lost in the Swedish translation to English.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. But what I also found interesting is in listening to Bergman talk about titling the film is that, I don't know, perhaps I could say, like the color red, he latched onto the name because he's like, oh, I read that critic said that about that piece of music, and it just felt right. It just felt like an interesting way to describe the film. Yeah. And it's just like, okay, like the way that I feel like he's a very emotional, he attaches himself very emotionally to things, like using the color red, which was just a thought. It was like a dream that he had of seeing 4 women in white in a room of red. And that was like basically all it was that kind of gave him the idea to come up with this story. And same thing with the title, is like he said that, and it just sounded like, I feel like there's Cries and Whispers. And I feel like he emotionally attaches him to himself, to these properties of his. And then all these people come along trying to kind of pull all sorts of stuff out of it that may not be accurate. And maybe it's just, he just had this vision of red, and it felt right, and he's just kind of going off of that. And I feel like it's hard to kind of dig too deep in some of this stuff, because it's like, I don't know if he was digging that deep. I think he just went off of the raw emotional gut reaction to things.
For crying out loud, man. You, for weeks, have had a Zoom background from Grand Budapest Hotel. If Wes Anderson isn't more incisive with his use of color, I don't know how to have this conversation. Like, this is, I feel like there are so many great ways to use color, and I feel like we're lobbing interpretation for the joy of interpretation on Bergman that is undeserved. This may be another in the list of Pete's movies like 2001. Fine, but I find like digging into his motivations for color and I don't have it. I don't have the will for it.
That's what I'm saying. Let's move past that, because I don't think he dug that deep.
I don't think he cared.
That's what I'm saying. I think
it's dramatic.
I think he liked the look of it. It was like a really cool, haunting look to tell a story like this.
Totally. And to just round out your story, a part that I find interesting is that conversation that he had was with his cinematographer, and he said, "Hey, I have this vision of 4 women in white in a red, all red, everything red. Do you think we could make a movie out of it?"
Yeah.
And the cinematographer says, "Yeah, I think we could do that." He says, "Okay, I'll have you a script in 2 months." And there they were. That's it. That's what we have to work with.
I really like what he did with the film. I think that this is a story about death and dying and emotional raw energy. Yeah, I think red is a really interesting way to kind of explore that. But I just don't think you need to dig deep into like all these meanings. I think that sure, maybe you can read all that in there, but I don't know. I struggle trying to put too much weight into any of these particular things, even if they are there. I just, everyone's going to interpret something differently, because Bergman is not expressively saying this is because of this is because of that.
Right. It's fine. Make it a game. That's fine. But I just want to ask you this one question. Guilt and grief, suicide attempts, death of uterine cancer. I'll just say death, horrible death. We don't know from what's on screen why. We look at betrayal of those who we employ to care for us. We look at lampooning of faith. All of these things we have on screen. Do you have anything in here to love, like to really enjoy in your experience of watching the movie?
It's hard to feel saying the word love in context of the stories that Bergman puts forth. Like, I love the imagery. I love the way he constructs shots. I love the performances. I think that there are very strong performances here. But in context of the story and the kind of the nature of it and the message and stuff, I don't love it. It's not, I don't think it's a story that grabs me right away. I think there are interesting elements. This to me is like a film school film. It's an interesting film to kind of watch and look at and see what he's doing with it. But for me, I don't know. I struggle with the kind of getting into the story. Like I never get emotionally connected to it, and I think that's what I need to really be able to say I loved something about it.
Well, it's a perfect sort of exemplar in our book of movies that are less than the sum of their parts. Because I agree with you. I find a lot of the work that goes into just sort of constructing the film is much more interesting than what comes out at the end of it, and or at least I don't even know if interesting is the right word, but it's certainly worth noting how hard it is to make movies, and particularly how hard it is to make Bergman movies. The stories of how he is on set in terms of his director's experience, right? That he comes out of theater and so very much treats the experience of being on set like a theater experience. There are many rehearsals with all crew and all actors, right? Moving through each scene. And in this case, there was a lot more at stake. It was largely self-funded, and so he had a lot to sort of earn back and figure out if he could get this movie made. I feel like that experience of Bergman is an interesting one, so much beyond the experience of actually watching the movie, which just was a lot of work. Well, let's talk a little bit about cast and crew as we as we move through this. So it's written and directed by Bergman. We've talked a lot about Bergman. Who else are you in love with?
I mean, at the time, Bergman was in a relationship with Liv Ullmann, who's in the film, and I think she's great. I don't know the history here, and maybe I shouldn't dig too deep into it, but I feel like he had been through, I don't know if he had been through a breakup or divorce or something before this that led to kind of him writing this. He was alone on his little island hut where he lived, and came up with all of this, and I don't know if somewhere between there he started seeing Ullman. I'm not exactly sure, but anyway, I think Liv Ullmann is spectacular in the film. I mean, I really enjoy watching her, and I mean, as somebody who's in all these Swedish films at the beginning of the 70s that the Oscars were noticing, The Emigrants, The New Land, I think that she's just really a fascinating character on screen, and does a great job here as kind of the sister in kind of these emotional turmoil moments, also having like these passionate desires for this doctor. And we didn't even mention she is in kind of the flashbacks as the mother, which was kind of an interesting choice.
Karen, the other sister, played by Ingrid Thulin, I think is another fascinating sort of portrayal of a complicated person who's dealing with her own little struggles. I find her particularly magnetic. I already sort of had my on-screen relationship with Liv Ullmann. Like I knew my experience with her from Emigrants, but Ingrid Thulin was new to me, and I found her quite enchanting. I wish that I had been able to see her more happy more often.
I mean, you could say that about any of them. There's not a lot of joy in the film.
Fair. Right.
But it is pretty interesting, and seeing. I mean, I think that her performance is strong. Right? I think there are interesting elements of the way that the sisters are portrayed in coming in and out of the moments of their kind of compassion for each other. Mm-hmm. I find that seeing that portrayed to be very interesting, and I think that the actresses deliver that quite well.
Kari Silvan is Anna, the nurse maid, and she carries an awful lot of weight in this film. Awful lot of water.
We didn't even bring up the whole idea of the way that Bergman composed some shots with her that resembled kind of a pietà. It was a very compelling imagery when Anna would, in order to provide comfort for Agnes, she would like take off one side of her blouse, revealing a breast, and then kind of get in bed and have Agnes kind of laying there on her breast, much like the Virgin Mary. And it was like, I don't know, very interesting kind of relationship they were portraying there. And she hadn't worked with Bergman before, but I was like, I thought she did a very good job in kind of delivering this much more loving relationship in the film.
The only loving relationship in the film, right?
Absolutely,
and I think that's I found that was something I could kind of hang on to, was the Pietà symbol. Like I think that was an interesting way to demonstrate warmth, to demonstrate kindness, and attempt to demonstrate just sort of love and healing. And so it's an interesting segment, and one I found was nice before the end of that first half downturn.
And an interesting, like, obviously an image that people remembered, because 1981, the Swedish postal system actually issued a postage stamp of the scene where she's kind of holding her like that in a series commemorating the history of Swedish cinema.
I didn't catch that. That's interesting that they would do that 10 years later, that film had already endeared itself so heavily culturally that they would make a stamp of it. Andy, I wonder, they haven't yet made a stamp of this podcast. What will it take? Do I need to cradle you lovingly?
I'm sure that would be the moment that people choose to commemorate.
All right. Anyhow, those are the women in the film. They're stalwarts of Swedish cinema, and they carry a lot of weight for Bergman here.
And it's interesting because the men, I think, are largely just a bunch of uncaring, compassionless people, and they all feel very much that way, regardless of whether they're dealing with their own emotional strife or just straight up jerks.
Oh, they're jerks.
Yeah.
Pretty much all jerks.
Pretty much.
Not interested.
Yeah.
We talked about Sven Nykvist and the work he did on the camera, working with Borlund on makeup, production design, Marek Vosland. Incredible effort to be able to bring this on screen and not have us all blinded by red.
And not bleeding. I mean, that's the problem with red. Yeah. I mean, you look at films even into the 80s and 90s, like the one that always stuck with me was Flatliners, because there would be these moments where the film would go to kind of red when the person is entering kind of that death zone where they're kind of reliving moments or whatever. And the red, especially when you look at it later in like home video or whatever, it just bled all over the place. It was just horrible the way that it translated. And it's a very challenging color to capture in large quantities. And so the fact that Nykvist had to do such drastic tests to make sure that he could capture it the right way with the quantity that Bergman wanted, I think just goes to show that he really put the homework in to make it work.
I am stunned to look at our notes here and see there's this little area down at the bottom of our notes that Andy just sort of runs. And it starts with sequels and remakes. And I don't usually look at it before we do the show because I've done my part and I kind of want to... There's one bullet and it says yes to sequels and remakes.
I just hadn't had a chance to type it all in.
Possibly have to say after yes, there is a Cries and Whispers and what?
There's times where you have more time to type things in than others. I just wanted a note in there to remind myself, yes, I do have to go to this other tab to read about it because I just didn't have time to copy and paste.
I'm not casting any doubt onto your note-taking ability here, Andy. You are an exceptional note-taker. I am just flabbergasted that the answer is yes.
It makes perfect sense, Pete. This has been adapted for the stage. Of course it has, because it feels like a play.
It does, and that was a trick answer.
Of course it was, yes. In 2010, the Hungarian Theater of Cluj, not sure I'm saying
already
that right.
Makes sense.
They dramatized Bergman's story. I don't know, it piqued my curiosity because it said dramatizing Bergman's story and the film's production.
Oh,
what does that mean?
It's kind of Cries and Whispers, but noises off.
Right. Is it a... Wow.
Right?
Now,
And can you
there's the
imagine the
version of Cries
second
and
act? It turns. The whole theater turns.
This
And now you're looking what's behind
reveals
the
why
scenes.
Agnes wakes up at the end. You're supposed to be dead. I had to move. I had to go to the bathroom. I don't know.
Itch.
There was, anyway, they adapted it, and then it has been directed in another adaptation at the Bergman Festival in Sweden's Royal Dramatic Theatre, and again 2011 at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, moving the story to a contemporary setting, reducing the use of red, why, and replacing the film's classical music with modern songs, including Janis Joplin's Crybaby.
Janis Joplin is exactly who I thought of when I first watched this movie. I thought more Janis Joplin would actually really bring the point home.
I hear Bergman said that too, but couldn't afford her at the time.
He's very into R&B. That's what I've heard.
Oh, wow. Yes.
How to do an award season?
Well, this is the big reason we're doing this series, the Oscars. This film was nominated for Best Picture in 1973. It was nominated with The Sting and A Touch of Class, American Graffiti, and The Exorcist. The Sting, of course, won Best Picture. After having watched all of these films, I have to say, man, A Touch of Class feels just so of its time. Like, it just did not resonate at all with me. I would be happy just pulling that one out and picking something else, because listen to a few other films that came out in 1973 that didn't get nominated, Pete. Save the Tiger, The Last Detail, Serpico, The Way We Were, The Paper Chase, Paper Moon, Papillon. A lot of options in there. Take A Touch of Class out. I'd say, hey, maybe take Cries and Whispers out too, but hey. Yeah. Anyway, American Graffiti is not one of my favorites, but, I know it has love. Is it Best Picture worthy, especially when looking at some of those other ones? I'm not sure. What is interesting, and this is something we talked about last week when we talked about Z, and certainly we would have talked about in our episode on The Emigrants, the fact that this film was not nominated for Best Foreign Language Film like Z was, which kind of started a trend with some of the other ones that we'll be talking about later in this particular series. It looks like, for whatever reason, Sweden chose to not put this film up, not submit it. They did not submit a film in 1973, 74, or 75. After The Emigrants in 71 and The New Land in 72, they don't submit another film until 1976. And
is that why this film got a Best Picture nomination?
No, I think honestly it got a Best Picture nomination because of the release, because of the excitement and fervor at the box office for it, which we'll talk about here in just a sec. I think that's what kind of led to kind of that. It felt like what people would nominate for Best Picture at the time. But
you don't think there's any credence to the idea that had Sweden submitted it as a Best Foreign Language Film, it would not have gotten a Best Picture nomination?
Maybe. It's so hard to say. I'd like to think that would be possible, but also another thing is that I don't know, Sweden's relationship with Bergman at the time was a little off because of the way that he asked the Swedish Film Institute for some money, even though, hey, he's Ingmar Bergman, and here he is asking for money. I think some people were miffed that somebody who is a well-known filmmaker is getting money as opposed to some of the up-and-comers.
Well, and he's also widely known to have totally slammed the Swedish film industry for like a decade. Like he wasn't really nice to them for a long time.
And he had a few flops before this. And so I think people were like, let's not bother. I think, and it got a U.S. release before it was released in Sweden. So I feel like there's a lot of things that Sweden was maybe saying, you know what, we're not going to push this for you. So there, who knows? But what's interesting, if you look at the films nominated for Best Foreign Language Film, they were Francois Truffaut's Day for Night, which won, The Pedestrian, The Invitation, Turkish Delight, and The House on Shalush Street. I also watched all of these just as a way to compare. I would personally put Day for Night up as Best Picture over Cries and Whispers. I think it's a much better film. And it's about the film industry. I just feel like there's a lot of stuff going on with that film that I appreciate more than Cries and Whispers. So it's strange to me that Cries and Whispers does get a Best Picture nomination. It's peculiar. But anyway,
fascinating.
We'll jump into the numbers here in a sec, because I think that might spur this conversation a little further. But as back at the Oscars, it did win Best Cinematography for Sven Nykvist, nominated for Best Costume Design, Best Director, and Best Original Screenplay, but lost all of those, along with Best Picture, to The Sting. Over at the Golden Globes, it was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film, but interestingly, it lost to, which I don't think I've seen before, a pair of films that won, which happened to be the other Swedish entries, The Immigrants and The New Land. Go Sweden.
Locked down tight.
But it was very popular in award circles. It was one of those films, you know.
All right, so you've teased us with the numbers too much, Andy. How'd it do at the box office?
Well, like I was saying, this film does have a bit of an interesting story financially speaking. After several movies that did not do so well and, you know, a name that didn't sell too well overseas, Bergman ended up putting 750,000 Swedish krona of his own money into this film, borrowed 2,000 more, and then, like I said, asked the Swedish Film Institute for the remaining 5,500 for his 1.5 million Swedish krona budget. That is about $450,000 at the time, which is about 2.7 million in today's dollars. As I was saying, there was this complaining about getting money from the Swedish Film Institute, which is generally more for kind of beginning filmmakers. So he and his lead actresses and Nykvist agreed to return their salary as loans and then came on board as co-producers. Once he did that and got the money and everything, he comes to get the film made, and then he couldn't find any distributors interested in it, which is just kind of the pain for any filmmaker. You go through all that, getting all the money, and then no one wants to distribute it. Lo and behold, the person who comes to his rescue, of all people, is Roger Corman. That's right,
the
Roger
P.T.
Corman,
Barnum of the film industry.
Right. He buys the domestic rights for his New World Pictures label, and the movie is a huge success. Corman, as he's always said, is always profited with his films. He profited very handsomely from this. The film won many accolades. It became very popular. Like I said earlier, it premiered in the U.S. first because Corman was the first to jump on it for distribution. So it premiered in the U.S. before Sweden. Premiered New York December 21st, 1972, and then it opened in Sweden March 5th, 1973. Corman got a lot of money from this one. It was Bergman's highest grossing U.S. release in his lifetime. It earned $1.5 million domestically, which is almost $9.2 million in today's dollars, and it earned almost $470,000 in Sweden, or another $2.9 million in today's dollars. That means the film earned just over $12 million in today's dollars, giving it an adjusted profit per finished minute of a bit over $102,000.
That's amazing. It doesn't help that it's a short movie, too. So, in terms of your APPFM.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So it does help.
I do love this quote. Bergman, when asked about how much he'd earned from Cries and Whispers, he says, "All I know is that it was like playing one-armed bandit. You put a coin in the slot, the wheels start spinning, and suddenly 3 oranges line up in front of you. Money just gushed out of this machine." Gushed, Andy. Bergman himself used the word gush.
Doesn't seem like something he would say.
It does not.
No.
This is we got through it. What is there to
Bergman,
say?
It's Bergman. A tough one. It's emotional. It's devastating. And we're on the other side and ready to move on to the next one.
I can't wait to see how it does over on Flickchart.
Let's do it.
Head over to flickchart.com/thenextreel. You'll see all the movies we've talked about on this very show. If you want to save yourself some searching, swipe over in your show notes, tap the word Flickchart. It'll open up Cries and Whispers right in the Flickchart database so you can add it to your list and see how it stands up against ours.
I will say, Cries and Whispers, it's an interesting film. There's a lot of filmmaking prowess in the film itself. And, sometimes we rank on Flickchart because of the quality of production and what the art is of the film. A lot of times we also rank on emotion and which we'd put on first. And I have a feeling that this film will fall into that latter camp quite a bit.
I was
guess we'll
wondering
see.
why that setup hit you, why you felt the need for that setup, Andy. I'm deeply curious.
That's right. First up, we have Cries and Whispers or The Birdcage.
The Birdcage.
I will say The Birdcage.
You don't want to play Rock, Cries and Whispers?
Right. Cries and Whispers or The Brood.
The Brood.
I will say The Brood. Give me some Cronenberg. Cries and Whispers or The Hudsucker Proxy.
Hey, I'm all about Hudsucker Proxy.
Hudsucker is such a problematic film, but I would
not.
watch it over Cries and Whispers. So I will. It is, but I will still pick it. Cries and Whispers or The Little Drummer Girl, Diane Keaton.
You know what?
This is where we draw the line, I think.
Is it for you?
It is for me.
Okay.
I would absolutely watch, because at least this is where that art line, like I've now ticked over to the art side. I would 100% put this on. It's 90 minutes. Get me through the visual, fascinating filmmaking that Bergman is doing here, even if the story's tough. 100% over the mess of The Little Drummer Girl.
All right. You know what? I'm going to give this to you because I think ultimately, if we're speaking truth, all I have is I'm on my island and all I have is these two movies. I would probably stare at sand for an hour and a half. So I'm going to give this to you.
Cries and Whispers. All right. Cries and Whispers or The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas.
I would probably watch Whorehouse.
Yeah, I still am at a point where I'm like, there's more art in Cries and Whispers, so I would pick it over Best Little Whorehouse. You know what? Oh, we've got that fantastic. There's some interesting characters in Best Little Whorehouse. I'll pick that one. We've got Dom DeLuise. We've got the senator. I think there's some interesting stuff. So I'll say that.
Great dance hall in the Capitol. That was great.
There's some interesting things. Yeah.
Yeehaw!
Yeehaw! Cries and Whispers or The Danish Girl.
The Danish Girl, easily for me.
I'll say The Danish Girl. Cries and Whispers or The Hound of the Baskervilles, 1939. Little Sherlock Holmes. I'm going to say Hound of the Baskervilles.
Okay.
Cries and Whispers or Friday After Next.
Friday After Next.
I will say Cries and Whispers.
You know what? I'm going to take you to the mat.
Okay, here we go. One, two, three.
Scissors.
Rock. Cries and Whispers takes it.
I tried.
Cries and Whispers or Dinner for Schmucks.
Dinner for Schmucks.
I will say Dinner for Schmucks because it has a few perfect comedy moments in it.
Yeah.
It's not a great film, but I'll still pick it. That puts Cries and Whispers
for a reason.
It's right, exactly. 433 out of 463. Not very high on our chart. That's about a 6%, Pete.
6%, Andy.
Mm.
Wow. And this movie, I look at Flickchart on my own ranking, and this movie has a global ranking of 323. That is much higher than it is on my own Flickchart. And I'm so curious why I just am so far apart with the masses on this movie. I know I'm gonna rain hell.
But see, I don't think it's fair to say with the masses. I think to say with a particular group of people who really enjoy Bergman.
Fair. That's fair.
Honestly, I think that for Bergman fans and for those people who just love exactly what we're saying with like these people who just love analyzing and breaking all of this stuff down from the first shot to the last, absolutely, they're going to pick this film because it has that stuff in it for you to go through.
Well, absolutely. And I applaud those people who love this film. I really do, because I think that is I also love people who love crossword puzzles. I struggled with it, and it shows up at a not a great place on my list. Oh dear, where did it finally end up on yours? Did you beat 6%?
I did. Okay. I don't hate this film. I think it's an interesting one, and bless Bergman for making it only 90 minutes. I think that was a gift. I appreciate that. And so it landed in spot 3301 out of 4466, which is a 26%. So a little bit higher on my chart.
That is higher. it fell like a stone, man. Who am I kidding? It was it ended up at 1454 out of 1461, and there was no hard choice for me, and so that's a zero. That's a 0%. It's like so close to the bottom, like it's scraping. So if I were to go by that algorithm, it should be a 0 star over at letterboxd.com/thenextreel. And I don't think that's necessarily fair. I mean, I'm with you on the artfulness of the film. My experience of watching it is exclusively sort of the whatever joy I get out of it is in looking at the artfulness, the visuals of it. I'm gonna give it a 2 star over there, and not a heart. I didn't like it. I didn't like my experience watching it. Yeah. I'm not going to watch it again, but I'll give it a 2 star for the movies are hard score.
I'm a little more generous because I think there's just so much filmmaking craft in here. I think it is a beautifully constructed film. But like you, it's really just a challenge for me to watch. I'm at 3 stars, no heart.
Yeah.
So overall, that's a 2.5.
Right down the road.
And,
right down the middle of the road.
That's where it sits. Yep, that's where it sits.
So please tell me, Andy, what gift do you have for me next week?
We are taking a big jump. Not the biggest jump. The biggest jump was the first one when we went from 1938 to 1969. This jump, we're doing 1973 to 1995. We're going to be looking at Michael Radford's film, The Postman, or as it was called at the time, The Postman, Il Postino.
Excellent. Now, are you more enthusiastic this week than you were going into this coming week?
Very much so.
Are you more enthusiastic for last week than you were coming into this week?
I loved the film when I saw it back in 95. It just totally struck all the right notes for me. Also, it gave me the gift of Pablo Neruda, who I had never heard or read before, and I just totally fell in love with the kind of love poems that he does. So there's a lot to love about this film. I haven't seen it since 95, so I'm actually really curious to jump back and revisit it.
I'm curious too. You know, what we've got mostly, we're a big ebook family, but one of the only books that we have still on a shelf is a book of Pablo Neruda's love poems given to me and my wife on our wedding day by you.
By me? Oh, look at that.
You did that. Yeah. So there's that. Which is very exciting. So I too am excited about this. I'm much more optimistic than I was coming into this week. I have some downright enthusiasm and excitement about watching this movie again, and so I can't wait to do it.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins. Amazon giveth, Andrew.
As Amazon always doeth.
We were middle of the road or below on this film, so we went straight to the top of the barrel for this movie, and there were some gems floating right in the top. Maybe. I don't know.
And a lot of people love it.
Yeah, a lot of people love it. Had a lot of words to say about it. We picked some, our favorite abbreviated, little tiny doses of love.
Yes, indeed. We did.
What do you got?
I got Bruce K. Paulson, who gave it 5 stars, and he says, a bizarre Bergman film that I saw when it was released. So glad that I own it.
Well, that's
We're
awfully
glad too,
chipper.
Bruce.
Yes.
Thanks for those insightful 5-star words.
You know, I've got one that I think says, if there was an Ingrid Bergman of reviews, this would be that review. This review is to Amazon as Ingrid Bergman is to movies. How about that?
Oh, wow.
What do you think?
This is exciting. My curiosity has been piqued.
Well, let's just, so you got everything in here matters. So I will tell you first that this comes from Sylvia Toy Industries, who says 5 stars. I know. One of my personal top 10, on my personal top 10 list since it first came out, Sylvia Toy Industries says, one of the movies that taught me how to be a grown-up.
Wow.
Oh,
Wow, Sylvia, or do I say Miss Toy Industries?
Miss Toy Industries? Oh my goodness. This is rough role model material. Maybe consider something else. Maybe an Adam Sandler movie, or I don't know. I think there are a lot of sort of low rent, better role model movies than this.
I want to know if Sylvia Toy Industries is, because of the 5-star review, coming up with a line of toys for Cries and Whispers.
Right.
Like the genital mutilation toy with Karen and her little piece of glass in her hand.
Oh, Andy, come on. There was a line. You just leapt across it.
There are times where I feel like, what are you going to do? You're setting me up to jump, man.
I was just going to start with the poor husband with the little tiny knife sticking out of his gut, and you went straight to genital mutilation toys.
Oh.
Put that on your Instagram.
Right?
Thanks, Amazon. It's hard to believe we have been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
You're telling me producing this show week after week is so much fun, but it does require a lot of work behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our Originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
Your purchase is made through our links. Give us a small commission at no extra cost to you, and allow us to keep having these great discussions.
We covered a lot of great movies that were adapted from other material in Season 10.
Our Originals page at thenextreel.com/originals is where listeners can purchase the source material behind all our adapted film discussions. It helps support the show at no extra cost when you buy through our links.
In our foreign language Best Picture nominees series, we looked at several adaptations, including Z, The Postman Il Postino, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Letters from Iwo Jima.
We hit the high seas with In the Heart of the Sea from Nathaniel Philbrick's nonfiction book for our Aquatic Killers series.
Definitely a weaker entry in that series.
I bet the book is better.
Oh, me too.
Member bonus episodes featured adaptations like Gone Girl, The Russia House, Ivanhoe, The Hot Rock, The Big Heat, and Naked Lunch.
Oliver Stone brought not just original stories, but also adaptations like Conan the Barbarian, Scarface, Year of the Dragon, 8 Million Ways to Die, Talk Radio, and Born on the 4th of July.
Mary Herron's disturbingly insightful American Psycho was adapted from the Bret Easton Ellis book.
You like Huey Lewis in the News?
Oh my God, it even has a watermark.
And of course, more Stephen King with The Mist, The Green Mile, and The Shawshank Redemption for our King a la Darabont series.
Find links to all of these books and more adapted films on our Originals page. That's thenextreel.com/originals. Every purchase supports our show.
Get the full list of books that we've talked about and start your next read today at thenextreel.com/originals.